Well, TTIP is part of our international trade agenda. And the biggest problem in dealing with TTIP is the domestic American political agenda. We are in a very, very flat jobs situation. I mean, we're not creating jobs like we should. And even though we're coming out of this very bad recession, probably the worst since the Great Depression, manufacturing jobs are flat. And public confidence, the way people feel about the economy is tough. And there's always kind of an isolationist feeling in this country, in America, historically. Will Rogers said that years ago that America has two of the greatest friends in the world. They're the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And that kind of attitude is very much a part of the American political system. So we like to be self-sufficient. So therefore, trade agreements have never been easy to get through the Congress. And so I think that it just takes a whole lot of deft political leadership on the part of the administration and those in Congress and the business community who are for this to explain the benefits of it to elected officials and just keep working at it over and over again. But the counter trends are that we have elections every 2 years in the House and every 4 years in the White House, and trade agreements are not very popular. I'll give you a personal experience. I was in the Congress for many years, and I voted for the NAFTA agreement in 1994. And I lost my election that year. And I wouldn't say it was the only reason I lost my election, but it was one of the precipitating reasons, because my opponent raised the point that I was happy to ship jobs to Mexico, when that wasn't the truth at all. So these become very difficult political problems for a lot of congressmen. Well, we live in a globalized world, so it's a lot different than it was 50 or 100 years ago. I mean, we have foreign ownership of American companies, we have American ownership of foreign countries, there's cross-ownership, and so it's much more complicated, and it makes it much more important that we actually do have these trade agreements. But the protection of intellectual property for entertainment, software, pharmaceutical businesses and others is really critical. And if you can't maintain that protection of that patent or the copyright or the trademark, then no reason to put money in the first place to create the product. So those protections need to be solid as best as you possibly can, and that's a big part of the trade agreement. Another part is the kind of conforming rules relating to science, like, for example, in the area of food issues or food safety. Other parts of the world have different rules than we do in this country, and they're used as barriers to keep our products out. We've got to conform those rules, so there's kind of universal standards there. These problems are not unsolvable, however. We worked it out. It depends, and then the other issue is labor. It's a very big issue, how you treat salaries, wages, working conditions. The labor unions have often been very involved in these trade negotiations like TTIP, and many times they're very much opposed to them because they think it impacts the ability of American labor to compete in these markets. So it does take deft leadership by the business community and the executive branch particularly in working these things through to try to take care of as many of these problems as possible. Historically, it's been much easier to deal with these on a bilateral situation like U.S. Colombia or U.S. Panama, U.S. Korea, than it is a big, giant trade agreement. When it comes to the TTIP or other major trade agreements, so who are the players in that really, okay, so the biggest player, of course, is the White House and the trade negotiators. Second biggest player is the Congress. And the Congress, it used to be from a political perspective, trade agreements were supported bipartisan. Then later on, it was largely more Republicans supporting it because they were for free trade, and Democrats often weren't because the labor unions had an interest in it. But now it's not partisan at all. By and large, there's great distrust of trade agreements on both sides of the aisle. Some of this is job protection. Some of this is done in the context of our changing economies, which have, changed the nature of work in this country a lot. And who are the other important player, of course, is is the business community who has an interest in job creation. And the big communication items on these things is the ability to convince the American people that this will add jobs, not subtract jobs, and will add good jobs, not bad jobs. And jobs in the industrial sector, and jobs in the agriculture sector, jobs in the intellectual property area. And the trick is to do that at a time when we're not producing a lot of new jobs. And it's a tough job, I'll have to tell you that. And I wish I had a magic answer to the best way to get it done. So the White House is going to have to weigh all these interests and get everybody in the room and hope that they can work some compromises. And then, of course, we have to deal with our friends overseas who may not always have consistent ideas to ours. Well, I think that these agreements are important for the American economy writ large. I mean, I think we're going to grow with more trade, and more trade means fewer restrictions, opening of markets. So, you know, the economists will almost always be for trade agreements. And major manufacturing will almost always be for trade agreements. And look, 90% of the world lives outside the United States, or 95% of the world. So if you want to sell your products, the market here isn't just very good. You got to sell them outside. The problem is if you sell it outside, you got to buy it from outside. And a lot of people want heads I win, tails you lose, which means, yeah, I want to sell everything I can. I just don't want to buy any of their stuff. Well, it just doesn't work very well. And then the other thing is that we have very stiff competition now. We didn't have that before. We've got competition everywhere in the world. So that's why we need to sit down and improve the global trading system and kind of deal with the issues that we have right now. And so, but trade is politics. It's not just economics, it's politics. And a lot of the people who are in there negotiating these agreements just need to remember that the politics is the core bottom line in this in terms of whether you can get it done or not. Well, we have a tremendous and devastating drought all over the West, basically west of the Rocky Mountains. And of course, California is the largest agriculture producing state in the country, produces about 20% of the value of all U.S. agriculture. So, and to the extent that this drought continues, it's going to impact fruit and vegetable production in the United States big time. That will affect exports into markets, particularly in Asia, and will probably raise prices rather significantly. So the drought has been ongoing for a long period of time, and weather patterns are volatile, but it is indicative of the fact that we have a much different weather and climate situation than we used to have. And whether it's caused by climate change or whether it's just because of just the volatility of the current weather climate, it's a very serious problem, but for both farmers as well as consumers. Fortunately, you can grow fruits and vegetables all over the world and different parts of the United States as well, but it's going to have some impact, and the real issue is water. You know, the California agriculture is basically dry land or desert agriculture, and it requires massive amounts of water that come in from the mountains, the Sierras, and other places. If there's not much of a snowfall, then they don't have much water to capture. And so what are the long-term answers to this? Well, the long-term answers are A, prayer, so we hope that it rains more, and B, developing crops that are much more drought resistant. That means doing the kind of scientific research that needs to be done to give farmers more choices out there. It means better conservation techniques as well. But it's a tough, tough problem because in this country, we've kind of operated as if there are no limits. It's boundless. We can use as much water as we want, and we haven't had to conserve the soil as much as we used to, and now those times are changing.